Lebanon is in my heart. Almost 50 years ago, I first entered the Arab world through the portal of Beirut. And so when I see hundreds upon hundreds of pulverizing airstrikes on towns and villages and suburbs and big buildings, residential areas, it breaks my heart because I know the Lebanese and love them. The pulverizing of Gaza over the last 12 months has slaughtered an uncountable number of people and maimed many times more than that. That's now happening in Lebanon. The question is, what is the end game? Does the Zionist apartheid state intend to invade Lebanon on the ground? In which case, I think a Donnybrook, a battle royal, a battle with no predictable outcome will ensue. And one thing is for sure, there will be thousands of casualties on both sides. The Lebanese are led by their national resistance, and its leading edge, the Islamic resistance group Hezbollah. Hezbollah are no ordinary military outfit. They have members of parliament, they have ministers in the government, they have schools, hospitals, charities. They are a powerful organ of the Lebanese people, and all the signs are that the Lebanese are rallying behind them. Even Christian, even formerly fanatic, anti-Muslim Christian organizations are pledging their support to the Lebanese resistance. The mass of the Lebanese are behind that resistance, knowing that only that resistance stands between Netanyahu's invading armies and their sovereignty, their capital, their lives. The apartheid state is now using technology and science in a grotesque way. The pager terrorist offensive, which murdered and maimed hundreds of people simultaneously at the supermarket checkout, in the hospital ward, in the back of a taxi, and even, of course, in their own living rooms with their own children having their eyes blown out, their hands blown off, their legs blown off, their life's blood draining away because Netanyahu decided to ignite a mass terrorist attack, the biggest terrorist attack in the world since 9/11. Just think about that. This terrorist attack was then followed by a bombardment of a Christian area around the town of Jazin in Lebanon for purposes not yet clear, but the ordnance that was used might even have been a nuclear bomb. So what is the plan of Netanyahu? What will the resistance be able to achieve? And who will come to the aid of Lebanon? These are the issues we're discussing here on Have It Out with Galloway. Batool Subeiti is a Lebanese-born political analyst with a background in chemical and energy engineering. She's particularly interested in analyzing political and social issues, seeking to understand them from their root causes and offering perspectives not typically presented by the mainstream media. And I'm glad to say Batool joins us now. Batool, it's very good to see you again. Let me ask you, from the background of your professional expertise, many people have speculated that a nuclear device was dropped on Lebanon. If not a nuclear device, then something special. The Jazin skyline lit up in extraordinary fashion, and a mushroom cloud issued forth. Was it a nuclear weapon? Was it one of Donald Trump's mother of all bombs? Was it a vacuum bomb? What do you think it was?
It's good to be with you, George. I think I'll start off by saying that a war is not won by the capability to cause mass destruction. It's won by not allowing your enemy to achieve their goal. The resistance in Gaza and Lebanon have successfully thwarted the Israeli occupation entity's efforts to achieve its objectives during this past year while securing their own. If we consider the fact that the Israeli occupation entity aims to dismantle the Gazan resistance, to recapture the hostages through war, to divide the Gazan and Lebanese fronts, to relocate the settlers in the north, all of which have ended in complete failure. And if we consider the fact that the Islamic resistance of Lebanon aimed to act as a supporting front in exerting pressure to bring the war in Gaza to a halt, otherwise paralyzing the whole of the north of the occupation entity, and B, preventing the entity from accomplishing their goals of defeating the Gazan resistance, we see that the Islamic resistance of Lebanon have succeeded in fulfilling both of these goals. So ultimately, the Palestinian and the Lebanese siblings are brothers and sisters in arms, paying the price for the liberation of the lands from the Israeli occupation entity. In terms of the devices or the methods or the means that the occupation entity might use in order to bring the people of Lebanon to their knees, we know that this is a war of morale before anything. It is because the Israeli occupation entity is unable to defeat the resistance that they wish to wage a psychological war against the Lebanese people themselves. So for that reason, they killed over 400 Lebanese civilians yesterday, approaching 600 as of now. That's because they're struggling to get the Islamic resistance of Lebanon to stop its support for Gaza. So they resort to killing the civilians, and they also resort to these kinds of sound bombs, oh, we might use some kind of nuclear bomb, or some of these kind of high-tech weaponry. This is what the pager attacks were all about as well. They hope that the civilians of Lebanon will do the work for them, essentially, to pressure the resistance to stop supporting Gaza. But we know that the Islamic resistance of Lebanon also actually wishes for the Israeli occupation entity to ground invade, and to face them rather than having the occupation entity target civilians from the sky. It becomes a kind of big trap for them in that case. And they can target them much more easily. But we know the Israeli occupation entity is actually a complete coward. So all it can really do is drop bombs from the sky. But yesterday I spoke to a relative in Lebanon, and they shared with me just how high the spirits are amongst the people, despite the relentless bombings. You have those who are offering to donate their eyes to those who lost it in the pager attacks. You have pious Lebanese women who are marrying men who have had their arms completely cut off in this attack. You have Christians opening their homes, opening their churches to the Muslims. You have the people chanting, "All for you, Gaza. We pale in comparison to your sacrifices." So no matter how many F-35 jets are flying overhead, no matter the nature of the missiles that are raining down, this resilience cannot be destroyed. Houses and possessions can be lost, but the determination of treading the path of truth over humiliation, that's something that cannot be extinguished. And we must know also that none of this is new to the resistance or the steadfast people of Lebanon. We know Dahir was carpet bombed in 2006. Today, the resistance is 100 times stronger. If they couldn't defeat the capabilities back then, how on earth are they going to do that today? We know that blood has the effect of making the resistance stronger. The resistance has set its goals, and the resistance has been achieving every single one of those goals, as I've outlined. The Israeli occupation entity set its goals and has failed in achieving a single one of them. So civilian targets in Lebanon will only hasten the attacks against the Israeli occupation entity and bring it closer to collapse, which is actually the assessment of the Israeli top major generals and analysts themselves, like Yitzhak Brik coming out and saying, we have a maximum of 2 year survival rate if this war continues. So I think no matter the scare tactics, in my opinion, actually, the idea of this, pager attack of anything exploding at any moment is probably arguably the biggest psychological warfare attack of any kind, more so than even the idea of, dropping a nuclear bomb from the sky. But that hasn't failed to deter the Lebanese people. If that hasn't failed, nothing will. Ultimately, they are brothers in arms with their Gazan siblings.
Well, that's a very inspiring answer. If I were you, I would have given it, but it's my job to ask questions, so I'm going to ask it again. Did they drop a nuclear bomb on Lebanon? If not, what was it that they dropped? This is important because this would move the illegal behavior of the apartheid state onto a new level. Nobody has dropped an atomic bomb since 1945, when the United States dropped 2 of them. And secondly, you acknowledge the pager attack as having been intended as a psychological warfare method. And of course, that's true. It also did one hell of a lot of physical damage. How were they able to do that? Have you analyzed where these explosives were packed? Who's responsible? Is Motorola involved? These technical questions, your expertise would be helpful on that.
Absolutely. They are, as you mentioned, technical questions, but I don't think we should be surprised at the fact that when it comes to, agents, when it comes to the intelligence net, Mossad is #1 at these things. It might even surpass the CIA because the whole existence of the Israeli occupation entity is predicated on strong intelligence of that kind that can infiltrate. That's also part of the reason why it's very successful in targeting, Lebanese commanders within, for example, Dahia. It's because of that strong intel. So it shouldn't come to a surprise to us that they reign supreme in that regards. And also, it shouldn't come as a surprise to us that they have 0 red lines when it comes to the nature and the level of the destruction. So in the first 3 months of the attack on Gaza, that was the equivalent of throwing 4 little boy atomic bombs that were detonated in Hiroshima. So, when it's posed these kinds of questions, the extent of the red lines, the extent of the illegalities, that's not ultimately what wins the war. It is a war of morale. If the morale of the Lebanese people was shattered, then that would support the Israeli occupation entity in being able to ultimately target the resistance. Now, that they are unable to penetrate into that. In terms of the goals of the war, the capacity of the war, we need to focus on that kind of end result. We're seeing the Islamic resistance of Lebanon now, since yesterday, has expanded fire to cover 110 kilometers into the occupation entity. They have targeted the Megiddo military airport west of Afula. They've targeted the Ramat David base several times in the airport. They've targeted the Amos base. They're targeting the explosive factories in the Zahran area, which is 60 kilometers from the border. So we need to focus on the actual fact that in the greater balance of things, this is a war. Expect everything to happen in war. A war expects us to have this kind of cold mind and not a hot temper. It expects one to take decisions calmly and not based on, emotional reactions. And this is exactly how the resistance has operated. And that's exactly why the resistance has been able to maintain its strength and to secure its goals up until this moment. The Israeli occupation entity is the complete opposite of that. It's unable to achieve anything. So it resorts to destruction. That's the only thing that it can do. So we get emotional when we see these effects on the ground, but it requires emotions to be on the side when ultimately taking, decisions. And we know that the resistance on the ground knows what it's doing. It was nothing 40 years ago. And now within 11 months, it has paralyzed the entire north of the entity. So this is a long struggle. It shouldn't be a surprise that the entity has the upper hand in this kind of war with high tech, with precision striking. We cannot expect the resistance to have those same level of capabilities as America or the Israeli occupation entity does. The resistance has its style, its strength in warfare. It's keeping its pressure high to prevent the entity from achieving its goals. Meanwhile, it is increasing its capabilities in its position of strength. And of course, the other aspect, which is very important that I've mentioned, that morale that's undefeated. So therefore, the enemy can never realize their goals. It's enough for the US deploying its, USS Truman to the region to protect the entity, to show you how strong the resistance capabilities are and how seriously they're considering it. Many targets are within the resistance's ability, and what we've been seeing is ultimately those hood targets that they took pictures of and they released in, various episodes in June, we're seeing these being struck right before us. So if we think of the fact that the Israeli occupation entity, as per their own standards, has maximum 2 years survival rate. If you look at the extent of the security penetration, the settlers don't feel safe. I was reading about how actually one of the soldiers was saying that I can no longer live here because the values for which the Israeli occupation entity was founded upon, the values of ultimately securing its citizens, is no longer there because Netanyahu works on a whim. He is dragging us into this expanded war in which the heart of the Israeli occupation entity could potentially be struck, and we are not safe because our Iron Dome is not protecting us. Now, if we think in this context, if we think of the fact that just yesterday, 300,000 settlers from Haifa, because that's the current rule of engagement, it's striking up until Haifa, have resorted to, bombshells, to ducking down on the streets. These settlers won't be able to last much longer, especially post-war. They can never trust that they're not going to get another security penetration and intelligence penetration like October the 7th. So if we consider that status quo, if we look at the situation of the economy, if we look at the social fragility and fragmentation on every social indicator, there are divides even within the top strata of Israeli, top decision makers. Look at Netanyahu versus Gallant versus Gantz versus Lapid. Each one has its own strategy that's contradicting with one another, that's also contradicting with, the American long-term division in terms of what is actually to the interests of the Israeli occupation entity that's now held hostage to Netanyahu ultimately. This entity is unsustainable because it's on its last knees. It is resorting to this level of criminality, this level of bloodlust, this level of aggression, because it cannot do anything else. So we have to see its attacks within that scope of things and also understand what are the inherent strengths of the Israeli occupation entity. Yes, it has high tech. Yes, it has high intelligence. It reigns supreme in that, but that has not allowed it, despite that, it has not achieved any one of its single military strategic objectives. Therefore, it has lost the war. If you lose the war, maps get carved out of wars. The victors of the war are the ones that ultimately have the say for the region moving forward.
Now, you twice mentioned the Americans, and they have sent additional warships to the area and thousands of new troops. Do you expect them to join the war?
Right. The war has expanded to now include the heart of the Israeli occupation entity. And it's also, excluding the indiscriminate bombings of Dahia and Beirut. So right now, it's not, even till now, it's not yet an all-out war. Right now, the current rules of engagement is that all areas up to Haifa in the occupation entity are up for targets by the resistance in an open account. And likewise, all areas in Lebanon, excluding the Dahia and Beirut, can be attacked in an indiscriminate fashion, meaning the civilians are not per se the targets in Dahia as of yet. So I believe that this rule of engagement will likely continue from now at least until the American elections are over. Then I believe after that, there will be security negotiations. The Lebanese resistance will not accept less than the decision of UN Resolution 701. That's a complete removal of the Israeli occupation entity from all parts in the borders that are disputed, stopping that Air Force transgression over Lebanon. And when the Gaza front calms after the election and some kind of agreement is reached, most likely the war in Lebanon, I believe, will stop in stages without a definitive solution. So I don't expect the war to expand further. And we're talking about American intervention. We're definitely talking about an all-out war. America will not get involved in this situation unless it gets to the point of an all-out war. And America has expressed it does not find it within the interests of the Israeli occupation entity or itself ultimately to be in an all-out war because all its targets in the region are of course, vulnerable. All of its bases are up for targets, essentially. And nor do I expect, in the same vein that I don't expect America to get involved directly, because I don't don't think it's going to expand into an all-out war. I don't expect Iran to get involved directly either, and nor do I think that that is productive or needed. Within the general rule that the closest front is the one within the resistance that's fighting, unless the existing fighting front is severely weakened. So supporting fronts in general, they get involved in steps. But I do expect the Iraqi resistance will increase its hits, including the American bases. I expect Yemen to become more effective. I expect there to be preparation for more operations, whether that's from the sea, from the ground, launching maybe offensives inside the northern region of the occupation entity with preparation on the ground for a potential ground invasion. I do believe, of course, Lebanon will be making that preparation. But as I mentioned, the Islamic resistance of Lebanon actually wishes for the occupation entity to ground invade, to face them so that it becomes a trap for the occupation forces in that case. So they can target them much more easily and harm them much more greatly on the ground. But I don't think the ground invasion will happen as of now, but preparations will be there. And the region is now in a level of course, heightened instability, double, triple what it was before. We are closer to an all-out war if there are a few more kind of reckless escalatory steps that are taken. But for the foreseeable future, I don't think that's the case, at least definitely not now until the American elections. I think it will stay at this level.
Very revealing interviews. Batool Subeiti, thank you very much for joining us on Have It Out with Galloway. Let's go first on the video wall to Patricia Talib, who is in South Lebanon. Patricia, thank you for joining us in what must be very difficult circumstances. Are you able to paint a picture for us of what the last few days have been like?
Yes, definitely. So it's quite the picture. We woke up yesterday morning. We were doing our morning prayer, and then the rockets started. I initially heard the rockets, and I was reading the news. I thought it was rockets from our side. The rockets started exploding. We had several other explosions. It was I think an F-35 plane, and ever since everything's been shaking. The Zionist entity entered Lebanon, and it entered Lebanon in a very genocidal manner. We hear the news that they're talking about that they've bombed rockets that belong to Hezbollah and rocket places that they keep their rockets, but that is not the case at all, because we can see even from where we are, from the people that have been hit in our villages, that those are houses that are absolutely safe houses. All of those people that they're hitting are civilians, and truly the goal is to terrorize the Lebanese the people of the South. That really is effectively what is happening. In terms of bombings, it's calmed down over the past few hours. We've been hearing occasional bombings. The most intense ones were yesterday. In the afternoon, they calmed down. Last night, they started sending these drones that swear they curse the resistance, and they have these new drones that make ghost noises in the night. But to me, ultimately, this is childish. This is childish behavior. I don't think our children are afraid of them. We have decided to remain in our houses. A lot of Lebanese people have left. A lot of people from our village has left. That is normal. A lot of people are scared. Their nerves can't take it. But the majority of us are still remaining in our homes. We have several families here in our home. We're very calm, and our morale is really, really high. I would say our morale has not been higher. And I would say in general, support surrounding me has never been higher for the resistance than I've ever seen. Even with people from different political views, we've actually seen a way in which people have united. People are giving their house keys to each other. They're supporting each other. All of our posts online, all of everybody around me, even from my own family that have opposing views to the resistance, maybe per se, or they're not Hezbollah supporters, to be exact, are very much in support. The morale is very high. And I would say not one person has any negative thought when it comes to the resistance ability to be able to lead this war.
Now, 600 people at least have been killed in 48 hours, less than 48 hours. We know for certain that many of those were women and children, ipso facto not Hezbollah fighters. The death toll, even at this level of aggression, is Gaza plus, actually. There are a few days when 600 people die in less than 48 hours in Gaza. Are you expecting this to continue at this level, Or is the relative quiet of the last few hours that you described more likely to be the new normal?
To be honest, I think that analysis is not something that we can do right now. I think what we need to do is we need to watch the front lines and we need to see how situations expand. It's true, even in Harib and Tammuz and the 2006 war, we had 1,500 civilians in total for the entirety of 33 days. So it is an unprecedented number. And truly, you can see that the entity is so unhinged and it's reached its genocidal, it's revealed and manifested its true genocidal reality for the entire world to see. In terms of how we expect things, again, I cannot say. I know that in Beqa last night was very, very brutal. The entity continued bombing and mostly civilian neighborhoods. Even like every one of my family members almost has had at least one building explode beside them. That is an absolutely civilian buildings, whole buildings full of people. It depends. I think that the general understanding here on the ground is that we're waiting to see how far the resistance is what resistance is going to respond to the hits. And from what we've seen is that the official statements have been that even that hit on Haifa that started the Fadi 1 and Fadi 2 rockets, both of those that hit was not for the sake of the Dahi assassination, and it was not for the sake of the pagers, not as vengeance for the pagers. So we are not sure how far the resistance is going to escalate. Whatever the resistance decides, I'm sure that the people will support, because people here are to death for the resistance.
Well, the whole audience will be applauding silently your heroism and determination. I'm sure about that. I wonder if you could give us some insight into the impact on children of this last period, because we don't often get to talk to them or hear them. And as a father of 6 children myself, I'm particularly interested in whether they have absorbed their parents' determination and understanding of why this is happening. Describe, if you will, your experience with the children, say, in your village.
I think the most difficult part and the thing that's broken our hearts a little bit has been looking at the kids, to be honest. Because what is their fault? You know, they're tiny, little, innocent beings. And some kids, I can see that resilience is already manifested in, but I think a majority of those kids, that has not been the case. We see kids having panic attacks, they freak out. Now when the bombings start, they start to run into each other. They don't know where they're going. We don't have bomb shelters, for example, to keep them safe. And we know that the entity does not have mercy on anybody. There's always fear from the parent. If the child even strays away, come here, don't come here. They're it's a very difficult situation to care for the children to begin with, to explain to them how serious the situation is without breaking their morale completely. It's difficult. It's very difficult. The constant crying, constant, especially from the little ones, they don't understand what's going on. They don't have really the capability to process the monstrosity that is going on right now. The earth shakes, our whole house shakes. We can't close windows because they'll break. You see things getting toppled. You constantly call your family, your friends. So it is a difficult situation for them as well. Sometimes they'll leave and they'll leave their grandparents behind, their fathers behind. It's very heartbreaking to see, especially the little kids. But I'm sure that they will grow up and they will learn resilience from this and they will become stronger.
Patricia, may God protect you, and I'm sure I speak for the whole audience on that. Thanks for joining us. Joseph Robertson is in the comparative safety of London. Joseph, what's on your mind? Not always that safe in London, I know, but compared to South Lebanon, it's safe.
Well, it's knives rather than bombs over here, fortunately. But my question to you, George, I guess, was how do you feel in terms of the British involvement in this situation, and what can we expect from a Labour government that doesn't seem to be able to even engage its own citizens in relative democracy? How are they going to respond to this potential threat of escalation? And do you feel that perhaps Britain's involvement in Lebanon in recent years merits in fact, some kind of involvement, or certainly at least some statement from our side over the next 48 hours?
Well, thank you. The Labour Defence Minister, a man you'll never have heard of, called Healy, not to be confused with a former greater Healy, once the Defence Minister and many other things in Britain. He has just announced at the Labour conference that he's headed for London and a COBRA meeting on Lebanon. I would have thought that that will have two purposes. The first, to use Royal Navy assets to try to lift British citizens, of whom there are quite some number in Lebanon, to try and lift them out of the war zone. And that's the least you would expect a British government to do, but rather more sinisterly. The British government before the last 60 days and the one we have now, a so-called Labour government, is up to its neck in the crimes of the Israeli state. It is literally actively participating, not just in the much discussed issue of licensing the selling of British weapons to Netanyahu. 9 out of 10 of those contracts and licenses are continuing. You heard Patricia talk there about an F-35 delivering death. Some 20% of the F-35 is made in Britain. So that F-35 that tried or succeeded in killing people in Patricia's village would not be able to do so if it were not for British weapons sales. But even worse than that, we are using our sovereign airbase in Akrotiri in Cyprus, in somebody else's country. Heaven knows why Cyprus tolerates such a colonial arrangement whereby British and American warplanes and British and American surveillance and reconnaissance aircraft fly daily, hourly actually, out of a Cypriot airbase without even the suggestion of consulting the Cypriot government. So we are deeply involved in the conflict in Gaza and in Lebanon from that standpoint. And worst of all, I personally have absolutely no doubt, and I have reasons for what I'm about to say, that British special forces are present in Gaza, and if a ground invasion occurs in Lebanon, I have not the slightest doubt that British special forces will be involved in that. Britain and the United States are jointly and severally responsible for every crime that has been committed over the last 11 months, nearly 1 year, and which may change, even end the world. Thank you, Joseph. Stephen Nemeth is in the United States, in Fort Collins. Stephen, what's on your mind?
Hey again, George. Morning. So Lavender, the AI Israel is using to target people in Palestine, drones in Ukraine, telecom security, and many other things are removing the human element, which is otherwise present to permit de-escalation. I guess my question is, at what point can a few lunatics lock themselves in a bunker and chain together a scenario that ends the world? And more to the point, will getting people into the streets have any impact on that particular form of lunacy? This seems like a danger that we haven't seen historically. What about you?
Yeah, I presume you're referring to the cabinet of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the group of lunatics chaining themselves in a bunker and deciding to embark upon the end of the world. That is what it looks like to me. You know, one of my favorite films over all of my life has been Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. And Dr. Strangelove and that cabinet of people around that round table, many of them played by Peter Sellers, may God rest him, it seemed like science fiction, Dr. Strangelove, but it looks more and more like the reality we are currently living through. First of all, I have absolutely no doubt that the US cabinet, or US government rather, not the group of people chaired by Dr. Jill Biden this week, I'm sure they were not consulted, but the US government greenlit this massive escalation of the war in Lebanon. I haven't the slightest doubt about that. They say that they did not know about that, about the pager attacks. I don't believe them. And I don't believe that Israel would be making such enormously escalatory moves without the express green light of the United States government. As to whether getting people on the streets will stop it, well, probably not. But what else can we do but get onto the streets? We have an obligation to do everything that we can. If you're a believer like me, you have an obligation to be able to answer on the judgment day that you did what you could to try and stop these crimes. But whether the American government will in the short term listen must be a serious doubt. But the rage against the war machine activities at the end of this month in Washington are enormously important. And they are pulling together quite widely disparate political forces and personalities. I myself was invited but cannot go. But the span of the speakers and the organizations supporting the Rage Against the War Machine is very impressive indeed. So anyone listening, watching in the United States should struggle might and main to get themselves to Washington for that particular action. Thank you for that call. Dr. Abdelalal Eflara is in England, in Leeds. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. Nice to see you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And lovely to see you again. I think last time we met, it was 11th of February this year. My question for you, George, is given the longest-standing occupation of the Palestinian land, continuous violation of international law, and recent Israeli escalation in Lebanon, as you mentioned, just in 24 hours, more than 600 people killed, a lot of children and women. What do you believe are the most effective strategy, politically and diplomacy, for achieving lasting justice and sovereignty for the Palestinian people, especially in the face of powerful international actors who seem to shield Israel from accountability? Thank you.
We have to do everything that's within our power to do it. Our power in Leeds is limited. Our power in the United States is greater because they've got a presidential election coming up and they've got congressional elections coming up. And the first call I have to make to all American voters is whatever you do, do not vote for Kamala Harris, because the Biden-Harris administration is up to their necks in the blood that we are discussing and describing here. I would prefer if you voted for the only Jewish candidate in the race, Dr. Jill Stein, because she's the only candidate openly committed to support for the people of Palestine, for the people of Lebanon, and opposition to the apartheid state. All the others are to one degree or another bought and paid for by the apartheid state. So whoever you vote for, though, don't vote for Kamala Harris. Don't reward genocide. The power of the people in other countries like ours, where our people just elected a genocide government, they just rewarded a genocide prime minister with a record parliamentary majority, albeit on only 34% of the vote, but God damn the 34% idiots that did it. God damn them. They had choices. They had alternatives. They had alternatives, including me, and they did not take them. So they are responsible for the crimes that are being committed by the government that they elected or allowed to be elected. There's no getting away from that. I'm not one of these people who likes to say, curse the government, not the people. In our country, the people elect the government, and they could have removed the government, and they could have elected an alternative to the government, but they did not do so, and so share the blame. We have to keep in perspective the success of what we're achieving. Everyone, including me, is guilty of exaggerating the impact that we are having. We routinely say, for example, that Israel has lost the public relations war. That's actually not true, you know. There are millions of people in your country, my country, in the United States, who fully support what Netanyahu is doing, and we have not persuaded them yet. We routinely say our boycotts are working. I've been telling people for the last 12 months that Starbucks has closed its operations in Dublin and renamed its Starbucks outlet in Dublin Airport. And what do I see this very morning? But Starbucks in Dublin Airport, and full of consumers. So we have to redouble our boycott efforts. That after voting, after demonstrating, boycotting comes next, and we're not doing enough boycotting. And we're not persuading enough people to follow the boycott. I'm very proud of my own family and their total and absolute dedication to the boycott. But can we all say the same? Can we say the same about our next door neighbor? Can we say the same about our workmates and our extended families? Until we can, don't tell me that we are winning the boycott war. Never confuse the thousands with the millions. It's been a political rubric of mine. Father Frank Gelly, my old friend and regular guest, joins us from London. Father Frank, I know Lebanon very well, and including the places being bombed. I have been in Lebanon and Syria, in the places where Jesus walked, and in the places where they still speak the language of Jesus, Aramaic. The Christian world is remarkably silent about the fact that Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jazin, and the very hills on which Jesus and the disciples walked are under Israeli bombardment. What say you?
One of my greatest friends was the late Archbishop Hilarion Capucci, a Palestinian who was arrested in prison by the Israelis for smuggling arms to Palestinian resistance. And even in later life, he was nearly 80-year-old, he took part in the Navis Marmara attempt to force the Israeli blockade on Gaza. So I see Archbishop Capucci as an emblematic Christian figure, showing how, as a Christian, one can forcefully fight oppression. And I should add, I consider it axiomatic that Zionists, Israelis, Netanyahu, are all facets of the same problem, only listen to force. Only force will eventually persuade the Israelis to give up butchering innocent Palestinians, women, children, innocent, all resolutions, all ethical considerations Zionists do not care for. Now, so my question for you, George, is given that now the balance of force seems disproportionately on the side of the Zionists, what can be done about it, realistically speaking? If I told you what I think I would do, I think I would be arrested. I would be barred. So I'm not going to say what I would do, but I would like to have your opinion.
Well, that's the world and that's the country we're now living in. You, a priest, cannot speak freely. I, a member of the British Parliament for almost 40 years, 38 years. I, as a television presenter, a broadcaster, cannot speak freely about what we think for fear of arrest, for fear of the show being removed. That's part of our problem and a part of our current weakness. So I can't answer you any more than you could ask me. I cannot say what I think should be done. I can only safely say what I think will be done. And that is that any ground invasion by Israeli forces of Lebanon is doomed to failure. I think the level of Israeli casualties would be far too high for the Israeli government to survive, for the Israeli public to tolerate. The Israeli public doesn't care how many hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and Lebanese are killed, but the Israeli public cares disproportionately about tens and scores of Israeli soldiers being killed, and thousands would be killed, in my considered opinion, in any ground invasion. So I don't actually expect that ground invasion to happen, and in that I'm with our guest at the beginning of the show, which means they'll continue to, as they have done in Gaza, deal death and destruction on a grand scale from the air. Now, the question is, who's going to come to Lebanon's aid? She said she ruled out, she doesn't speak for Iran, of course, but she ruled out any Iranian involvement. Well, I thought that was quite a significant thing to say, because Iran has been saying for many weeks that it is about to respond. So if Batool is right, there will be no Iranian rescue of the Lebanese masses. Russia has anti-aircraft batteries in Syria just up the road, including the S-400, which could knock these F-35s out of the sky before they were able to bomb. Is Russia going to come to Lebanon's aid? I very much doubt that. Is Macron, who's called for a Security Council meeting, is Macron going to be the savior of the Lebanese people? I very much doubt that also. So I think you and I, Father, have got to get down on our knees and ask the Almighty to come to the aid of the innocent women and children being slaughtered right now in Lebanon, as they have been for a whole year in Gaza, with no government meaningfully standing up for them, coming to their aid. No international organization meaningfully, it's been a lot of cosmetics, but meaningfully coming to their aid and stopping this disaster. My apologies to all those who didn't get through to the show. Time flies when you're having a show as good as I hope you thought this one was. Have It Out with Galloway is a unique show where you get to appear on the show. You get to be a part of the show, and memorably so in many, many cases. So join us, write to us at haveitoutwithgalloway.com to be a guest on this show. Tune in whenever it's on. And don't forget the mother of all talk shows every Sunday and Wednesday. I've been George Galloway. This has been Have It Out with Galloway.